While reviewing old documents, Anton stumbled upon a strange entry in a church book dated 1860. The village priest of Chorny Yar wrote about a bizarre illness that had struck several residents. Those afflicted became apathetic, lost interest in life, stopped speaking, and eventually died without any apparent reason. But the most unsettling detail was the priest's observation that all the sick exhibited the same symptoms before death. Their skin became pale and thin, their limbs elongated, and their facial features seemed to blur. In the final days of their illness, they ceased to resemble humans, the priest wrote. Their appearance distorts, as if something else is trying to manifest through the human shell. Lord, save and protect us from this calamity. Further entries indicated that the illness ceased after the villagers, defying the priest's advice, performed an ancient pagan ritual, sacrificing several animals at a specific location in the Taiga. The priest condemned these actions as a return to savagery, but acknowledged that there were no new cases of the illness after the ritual. This entry made Anton wonder, what if the Inked were not only capable of kidnapping people, but also somehow changing them? What if some of the victims were transformed into creatures similar to those they had seen in the cave? The thought was so terrifying that he didn't want to believe it was possible, but it explained why the Inked continued to exist despite their small numbers. His musings were interrupted by a noise at the entrance to the archive. There stood Jaeger, breathless and alarmed. "You need to leave immediately," the hunter said, looking over his shoulder. "They know what you found, and they're coming for you." According to Jaeger, he had noticed strange tracks around the village, ink tracks which had never come so close before. "They're looking for you," the hunter said, "and they won't rest until they find you." But Anton refused to run. He felt responsible for the fate of the missing people, especially Agafya, who had helped him with his investigation. Besides, he wanted to uncover the truth that had been hidden for over 200 years. "There's something else you should know," Jaeger said after a pause. "There are those in the village who serve them, people who offer sacrifices so that the rest can live in safety. This agreement had existed since the first Russian settlers arrived. According to the hunter, every few years, certain families would choose victims from among newcomers or marginalized members of the community. Lonely old people, vagrants, people whom no one would miss. They were secretly taken to the caves and left there. In exchange, the Inked would leave the rest of the villagers alone. But in recent years, they require more and more victims," Jaeger continued. "They're getting hungrier, and some in the village believe we need to return to the old ways. Not just leaving a victim in the caves, but performing real rituals like the shamans used to do." This information made Anton recall his dream. What if it hadn't just been a nightmare? What if a ritual was really being prepared somewhere in the taiga, where Agafya and the other missing people were to be sacrificed? He decided to act immediately. Together with Jaeger, they went to see Viktor Petrovich to demand an explanation. The head of the administration initially denied all the accusations, but when Anton mentioned his dream and showed him the amulet he had found in his house, his face changed. "You don't understand," Viktor Petrovich said quietly. "This isn't just superstition. They're real and they were here long before us. We're just trying to survive." According to him, the agreement with the Inked had existed for centuries. At first, the victims were criminals and vagrants, then prisoners from nearby camps during the Stalinist repressions. In Soviet times, it was disguised as accidents and escapes. But with the collapse of the USSR, the source of acceptable victims dried up, and they had to choose from among the locals or random visitors. "We don't want to do this," the head of the administration said. "But the choice is simple, a few lives or the entire village. They could kill us all in one night if they wanted to." When Anton asked about the fate of Agafya and the other missing people, Viktor Petrovich answered evasively, "It's not too late," he said. "The ritual is supposed to take place on the full moon. We have 2 days." Anton insisted on immediate action, but the head of the administration shook his head. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. They can't be killed with ordinary weapons. They're older than our civilization and possess powers we can't even comprehend." Nevertheless, after much persuasion, Viktor Petrovich agreed to help. He admitted that he knew where the ritual would be held. In an ancient stone circle deep in the taiga, a place the locals called the Circle of Shadows. According to him, it was a sacred place for the Inked, where the boundary between worlds was particularly thin. "But I warn you," the head of the administration said, "if we interfere, they'll come for all of us. The agreement will be broken." Jaeger volunteered to accompany Anton, despite the danger. They were also joined by 2 local hunters who, as it turned out, had long suspected the existence of a secret cult in the village and disapproved of its actions. They prepared as best they could, taking weapons, iron knives, amulets, and herbs that, according to Jaeger, could ward off the Inked. Viktor Petrovich gave them a map with the location of the Circle of Shadows marked and told them about the secret paths leading to it. They set off early in the morning, hoping to reach the place before dark. The journey was difficult. They traveled through the most remote parts of the taiga, where it seemed no human had ever set foot. The trees grew so densely that their crowns barely let any sunlight through, and even in the middle of the day, it was twilight. The closer they got to the Circle of Shadows, the more tense the atmosphere became. The air felt heavy and cold, as if they were descending into a basement. There were no birds or insects to be heard, only the rustling of their own footsteps and the soft whistling of the wind in the branches. By evening, they reached a small valley surrounded by rocky hills. In the center of the valley stood a stone circle, ancient menhirs, some of which were 3 meters high. The stones were covered in strange symbols, similar to those Anton had seen in the cave. They stopped at the edge of the valley, hiding behind the trees, and began to watch. At first, the place seemed empty, but as dusk fell, they noticed movement. A group of people in dark clothing emerged from the forest on the opposite side of the valley. They were leading several people with their hands tied. Anton recognized Agafya among them, and a married couple who had gone missing from the village. The people in dark clothing placed the captives in the center of the stone circle, tying each one to a separate menhir. Then they began preparations for some kind of ritual, arranging strange objects in a certain order, lighting fires between the stones. Anton noticed that among the participants in the ritual were familiar faces, several villagers, including Nikolai Stepanovich, the archive keeper. They moved mechanically, as if in a trance. Their faces were devoid of all expression. "They're under the Inkt's control," Jaeger whispered. "Some serve them willingly, out of fear or for power. Others they control directly." As full darkness fell, the ritual began. The people in dark clothing began to move around the stone circle, uttering words in a strange language that sounded like a mixture of hissing and clicking. The fires burned with an unnatural bluish flame, casting bizarre shadows. And then they appeared, tall figures, as if woven from darkness, between the trees. The Inked moved with unnatural smoothness, heading towards the stone circle. There were many of them, at least 10, possibly more. In the light of the fires, their pale skin seemed almost transparent, and their black, pupil-less eyes reflected the flames. Anton and his companions watched in horror, not knowing what to do. There were only 4 of them against many Inked and their human servants. But when one of the creatures approached Agafya and raised a hand with long, sharp fingers to her face, Anton couldn't stand it anymore. "We have to act now," he said, "or it will be too late." They had a simple plan: to create a diversion so that part of the group could enter the stone circle and free the prisoners. Jaeger and one of the hunters were to light pre-prepared torches and throw them to the opposite side of the valley, creating the illusion of a fire. At this time, Anton and the second hunter would try to get to the prisoners. The plan worked only partially. When the torches flared up, many of the Inkt's servants did turn in that direction, but several creatures remained at the stone circle, as if anticipating the deception. Anton and his companion rushed forward, taking advantage of the moment. They managed to reach the prisoners unnoticed and begin cutting the ropes. But when they freed Agafya, one of the Inked turned around and saw them. The creature let out a piercing whistle, attracting the attention of the others. Anton worked frantically with the knife, trying to free the married couple, but it was already too late. The Inked and their servants surrounded the stone circle. At that moment, Jaeger and the second hunter joined them, breaking through the ring of encirclement. A chaotic struggle ensued. The hunters shot at the Inked, but the bullets didn't seem to cause them serious harm. The creatures moved with incredible speed. Their long limbs turned into blurred shadows. Anton saw one of the hunters fall, seized by an inked. The creature leaned over him, and the man began to scream, not from pain, but from something more terrifying, as if his very consciousness was being torn apart. Jaeger fought back fiercely with his knife, and Anton noticed that the inked avoided direct contact with the iron blade. This gave him an idea. Remembering the ritual fires, he grabbed one of the burning torches and rushed at the nearest creature, aiming at its featureless face. The inked recoiled, making a sound like hissing steam. Its pale skin blackened where the flame touched it. The other creatures also retreated, clearly afraid of the fire. "Fire!" Anton shouted. "They're afraid of fire." Jaeger and the surviving hunter grabbed torches, forming a fiery barrier around themselves and the freed prisoners. The inked circled around, hesitant to approach, but not retreating either. Their human servants froze, like puppets with their strings cut. The confrontation could have continued until dawn, but suddenly something happened that changed the situation. The ground beneath the stone circle trembled, and a strange pulsation appeared between the menhirs, as if the air was thickening and thinning in a certain rhythm. "The ritual," Agafia whispered. "It started despite everything." In the center of the stone circle, the air began to swirl, forming something like a vortex. Inside this vortex, Anton saw something. He couldn't describe it in words. A form that was constantly changing, consisting of many eyes, mouths, and limbs. It was similar to the image of the deity he had seen in the cave, but infinitely more terrifying, more real. "The great ancient," Jaeger said in horror. "That which they serve, it's awakening." The inked began to move towards the vortex, as if drawn by an invisible force. Their bodies contorted and transformed, taking on even more inhuman forms. The human servants fell to their knees. Their eyes rolled back, foam dripped from their mouths. Anton realized that they had to run immediately. Grabbing Agafia's hand, he pulled her away from the stone circle. Jaeger and the hunter followed them, leading the freed married couple. They rushed into the forest, not caring about the path, just trying to get as far away as possible from the horror awakening in the circle of shadows. Behind them came a sound that could not be described. Neither a roar nor a scream, but something between a thunderclap and a multi-voiced whisper. The ground shook so violently that they could barely stay on their feet. Turning around, Anton saw a pillar of light rising from the stone circle into the night sky. Dark figures swirled around this pillar, merging with it and dissolving in its glow. They ran all night, weaving between the trees, crossing streams several times to confuse any possible pursuit. By dawn, they were exhausted physically and emotionally, but they kept moving, driven by fear. The sun was already high when they finally reached the familiar river, the boundary of the inked territory. After crossing it, the group took a short break. Only then could Anton question Agafia about what had happened to her. According to her, she had been kidnapped directly from her house by people in dark clothing, among whom she recognized several villagers. They had taken her deep into the Taiga, to the circle of shadows, where other prisoners were already being held. There she had seen the inked and realized that they were being prepared for some kind of ritual. They spoke of awakening the Ancient One, Agafia said, of how when it returned, they would rule this land again as in ancient times. Humans would become their cattle, a source of food for their minds. When asked what had happened at the end, when the vortex appeared, Agafia shook her head. "I don't know, but I felt the presence of something huge, ancient, and completely alien to human understanding, something that shouldn't exist in our world." By evening, they reached the outskirts of the village and stopped, not knowing what to expect. The village seemed empty. No sound, no movement, not even smoke from the chimneys. They cautiously approached the first houses and found that they were indeed empty. All the residents had disappeared, as if they had evaporated. "They went with them," Jaeger said grimly. "Those who served the inked willingly or under control. They had been summoned when the ritual began. They searched the village, but found no living soul. In some houses, tables were set for dinner, as if people had simply gotten up and left in the middle of the meal. In others, the beds were neatly made, as if the owners were preparing for sleep. There were no signs of struggle or panic. People had left voluntarily, obeying a call that only they could hear. Anton contacted the authorities of the regional center, reporting the mass disappearance of the residents of Chorny Yar. Soon police, rescuers, and journalists arrived. A large-scale investigation and search operation began, but not a single missing resident was ever found. Search parties sent into the Taiga returned empty-handed. One of the groups, sent to the area of the Circle of Shadows, did not return at all. 5 people disappeared without a trace. The official investigation stalled. Various theories were put forward, from mass psychosis to a religious cult whose members had committed collective suicide, but no bodies were found and gradually interest in the case waned. The village of Chorny Yar was declared an uninhabitable zone and removed from administrative registers. Anton returned to Irkutsk, where he tried to publish the results of his investigation, but the academic community met his story with outright skepticism. Colleagues spoke of stress, hallucinations, mass psychosis. Without hard evidence, no one believed in the existence of ancient creatures living in the Siberian taiga. Professor Dmitriev, his supervisor, was the only one who took his words seriously. He managed to gain access to some archival materials from the NKVD expedition of 1937. The documents were heavily edited, many pages completely blacked out, but even what remained confirmed part of Anton's story. They knew, the professor said. All this time, they knew about the existence of these creatures and decided to hide the information from the public. According to the surviving documents, the NKVD expedition had discovered objects of unknown origin in the Chorny Yar region that possessed anomalous properties. Studies showed that these objects were biological in nature, but their DNA structure differed significantly from that of humans. They possessed the ability to telepathically influence and could, to a certain extent, control people's minds. Particularly alarming was the mention of a superintelligence with which these creatures were connected, a kind of collective entity that was in a dormant state, but could be awakened under certain conditions. The report contained a warning. The awakening of this entity could pose an existential threat to humanity. After that expedition, a special department was created to monitor the situation in the Chorny Yar region. Periodically, groups of specialists were sent there to conduct observations and possibly contact the Inked. The last such group visited the area in 2010, after which the program was curtailed due to funding cuts. They just left it unattended, the professor said bitterly. And now we see the result. Anton couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the Circle of Shadows, what the creature they had seen in the vortex was, where the villagers had disappeared to, and, most importantly, whether the awakening of the Ancient One was complete or whether it was only the initial stage of some larger process. He received answers to these questions several months later, when news began to appear about strange incidents in various parts of Siberia. People in remote settlements complained of strange sounds at night, of the feeling that they were being watched. Cases of people disappearing in the taiga became more frequent. Locals spoke of tall, thin figures that they had seen on the outskirts of villages at dusk. Officials denied the connection between these cases, attributing everything to superstition, accidents, or attacks by wild animals. But Anton knew the truth. The Inked were expanding their territory, becoming more active and possibly hungrier. One evening, working late in the university library, Anton felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching him. Looking up from his book, he saw a tall figure standing between the shelves. Its proportions were wrong. Too long arms and legs, too thin a body. The face was hidden in the shadows. But Anton knew that there were neither eyes nor mouth there, only a smooth, pale surface with slight indentations. The figure did not move, just stood and seemed to study him. Anton felt a touch to his consciousness. Cold, alien, ancient. A voice sounded in his head, not uttering words, but transmitting concepts directly to his mind. We have returned. We are hungry, and we remember you. When Anton blinked, the figure disappeared, but he knew it was not a hallucination. The Inked had found him, and they were not only in the taiga. They were spreading, penetrating into cities, mixing with people. The next day, he bought a plane ticket to Moscow, planning to then leave the country. But deep down, he knew he couldn't escape. They would find him wherever he was, and not only him, all the people who had learned the truth about what was hidden in the depths of the Siberian taiga. Before leaving, Anton left all his records, documents, and evidence in a safe place, with instructions to publish them in the event of his disappearance. He didn't know if anyone would believe his story, but he felt he had to leave a warning, because the ancient evil that had been hiding in the taiga for 2 centuries had broken free, and the world needed to know that it was coming. Today, if you find yourself in the remote areas of Siberia, the locals may tell you legends about tall, thin creatures that emerge from the taiga at night, about people who disappear without a trace, about villages where all the residents suddenly leave, as if obeying a silent call. Officials deny these stories. Scientists talk about mass hallucinations and superstitions, but those who live near the taiga know the truth. They don't go into the forest after sunset. They hang iron amulets over the doors of their houses, and they never look directly at the tall, thin figures that can sometimes be seen at the edge of the forest at dusk, because the most brutal murderers of the Siberian taiga are hunting again, and no one knows where they will appear next. The most brutal murderers of the Siberian taiga, whose crimes were hidden for 200 years, so that you would feel, finding yourself deep in the Siberian taiga, where the trees whisper stories of crimes that should never have come to light, where every crack of a branch may not just be the sound of nature, but an echo of the footsteps of those whom the locals call only in a whisper. In this vast, wild area, where winters are merciless and distances are measured in days of travel, some secrets have been kept for centuries. It is here, in the depths of the Siberian taiga, that events took place that the authorities of the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union carefully concealed from the public. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn more about the secrets that history has preferred to forget. It all began in July of 2023, when a young historian, Anton Severov, arrived in the small village of Chorny Yar, lost among the endless taiga of eastern Siberia. The village, numbering barely 100 residents, seemed frozen in time. The dilapidated wooden houses, the lack of cell service, and the wary glances of the locals created the feeling that no outsiders had visited here for decades. Anton had come here on the advice of his supervisor, who had briefly mentioned strange archival documents, hinting at a series of unexplained disappearances in this region between 1800 and 1920. The weather was unusually cold for the middle of summer. Fog lay between the trees, obscuring the outline of the taiga, which began right behind the last houses of the village. The air smelled of dampness, decaying leaves, and something else that Anton couldn't identify, something ancient and alien, as if the very earth here was soaked in fear. He was put up in an old house on the edge of the village, belonging to a local resident, Agafya Petrovna, a wrinkled old woman with eyes the color of a storm cloud. The house creaked and groaned at night, as if trying to tell its secrets. On the very first evening, Anton noticed the strange reaction of the locals to the purpose of his visit. When he mentioned that he was interested in the history of disappearances in the taiga, silence fell, faces became impenetrable, and the conversation quickly turned to other topics. Only Agafya looked at him intently, as if assessing whether he was worthy of learning the truth. Before going to bed, she quietly told him, "There are not only wolves and bears living in the taiga, young man. There are things that are better not to ask about." The next morning, Anton decided to visit the local archive, which in reality turned out to be a small room in the village administration building. The archive keeper, a gray-haired man named Nikolai Stepanovich, reluctantly allowed him to access the documents. Most of the papers concerned ordinary matters: births, deaths, orders from local authorities. But in the far corner, Anton discovered an old, dust-covered chest with a lock. When he asked about the contents of the chest, Nikolai Stepanovich answered evasively, but after much persuasion and a small sum of money, he agreed to open it. Inside the chest lay documents yellowed with age, some in Old Russian with pre-revolutionary orthography. Most of the papers dated from the period between 1830 and 1850. Among them, Anton discovered a strange diary, wrapped in cracked leather. On the first page was the name Yermonik Feofan. The diary was written in faded ink. Many pages were damaged by time and dampness, but Anton immediately realized that he had found something important. By the instruction of His Eminence Inokenty, Bishop of Irkutsk, I set out to the northern lands to convert the foreigners to the Christian faith. But what I saw in the depths of the taiga defies human understanding and is contrary to God's nature. So began the diary of Yermonik Feofan, dated 1832. As Anton read the diary, he learned increasingly disturbing details. Yermonik Feofan described how the local Evenki told him about strange incidents in the taiga, about people who went hunting and never returned, about tracks in the snow that did not belong to any known animal, and, most strangely, about shamans who spoke of ancient creatures living in the depths of the taiga, creatures that had been here long before humans. The shaman Elchin showed me a place where, according to him, these creations reside. I only saw a dark cave in the mountainside, but felt such fear as I had never experienced in my life. The air around the cave was unnaturally cold, and not a single bird sang nearby. Elchin said that these creatures only come out at night and hunt all living things. They do not eat flesh, but take something more valuable, the soul of a man. Anton stopped reading, feeling goosebumps run down his spine. He noticed that Nikolai Stepanovich was watching him with undisguised concern. "You shouldn't have seen this, young man," Nikolai Stepanovich said. "These records, they bring trouble to those who read them." Despite the warning, Anton continued to study the documents. Among them, he discovered official reports from Tsarist officials about unrest among foreigners and superstitions hindering the development of the region. But between the lines, real anxiety could be read. One of the reports stated, "In the last 3 years, 27 people have disappeared without a trace in the area of the village of Chorny Yar. Locals refuse to go deep into the taiga and speak of a curse. I recommend strengthening the presence of Cossack detachments and conducting a thorough investigation." In another document, dated 1845, the order from the Governor-General of Eastern Siberia stated, "Due to the increasing cases of people disappearing and the spread of harmful rumors undermining the authority of the government, I hereby order that all information regarding incidents in the Black Yar area be considered classified. Those found guilty of spreading panic and superstition will be subject to severe punishment." What so frightened the Tsarist officials that they decided to conceal the information? What danger lurked in the depths of the Siberian taiga? Anton decided to continue his investigation, despite a growing sense of unease and the locals' clear reluctance to talk about the past. That evening, Anton tried to question Agafya about old legends. At first, she refused to answer, but after he mentioned the diary of Yermonik Feofan, the old woman turned pale. "How do you know about him? That name is not spoken aloud in our village." After much persuasion, Agafya finally agreed to tell him what she knew. According to her, the history of Black Yar and the surrounding taiga was much older than historians could imagine. Long before the arrival of the Russians, this land was sacred to the local tribes. Rites were performed here, the nature of which has long been forgotten. But most importantly, here was the entrance to another world, a world of spirits and beings whose names must not be spoken. "My great-grandfather was one of those who saw them," Agafya said quietly. "He was a hunter and once got lost in the taiga during a snowstorm. He found shelter in a strange cave, where the walls were covered with symbols he had never seen before. At night, he awoke to a sound like the whisper of many voices. In the darkness, he saw figures moving with unnatural grace. They looked like people, but something about their movements was deeply wrong. My great-grandfather pretended to be asleep, and when dawn broke, he fled from the cave as fast as he could, but they found his trail." According to Agafya, her great-grandfather managed to reach the village, but after that, he became a different person. He refused to leave the house after sunset and constantly said that they were watching. A month after the incident, he was found dead in his own bed. His body was undamaged, but his face was frozen in an expression of extreme horror, and his hair had turned completely gray. Since then, a warning has been passed down in our family from generation to generation. Never go deep into the taiga and never look for the cave with the symbols. Agafya finished her story. Anton wanted to know more, but Agafya suddenly fell silent and refused to continue the conversation. That night, he had nightmares. Dark figures moving between the trees and whispers in a language he did not understand. The next day, Anton decided to visit the local library, hoping to find additional information. The librarian, an elderly woman named Valentina Ivanovna, reluctantly showed him the local history section. Among the dusty volumes, he discovered a book entitled Ethnographic Studies of the Peoples of Eastern Siberia, published in 1912. One chapter of the book mentioned a strange cult that existed among some Evenk tribes. They worshipped beings they called the Masters of the Taiga, not spirits of nature, as one might think, but something more ancient and dangerous. According to their beliefs, these beings lived in the underworld and emerged onto the surface through special places of power. They could take human form but were distinguished by pale skin, unnaturally long limbs, and a complete lack of emotion on their faces. Most disturbing was the description of the rituals associated with these beings. The author of the book, ethnographer Pyotr Semyonovich Vasilyev, wrote, "Some tribes practiced human sacrifice to appease the masters of the taiga. Every few years, they would leave living people tied to trees in certain places. According to their beliefs, the masters took not the body, but the soul of the victim, leaving only an empty shell. Such people sometimes returned to the tribe, but they were never the same. They did not speak, did not show emotions, and soon died." Vasilyev noted that with the arrival of the Russians, these rituals were forbidden, but they continued to be practiced secretly in remote areas. He also mentioned strange cases of people disappearing and superstitions that the masters of the taiga were taking revenge for the cessation of sacrifices by taking random travelers. Reading these lines, Anton remembered the documents from the archives. Could the disappearances recorded by the Tsarist officials be connected with these legends? If so, why did the authorities decide to conceal the information? Continuing to study the book, he came across a mention of a map drawn by Vasilyev, which marked the supposed entrances to the world of the Masters of the Taiga. However, the map itself was not in the book. The pages where it should have been had been carefully cut out. When Anton asked Valentina Ivanovna about this, she turned pale and quickly said that she knew nothing about the map, but her reaction suggested otherwise. After much persuasion, the librarian admitted that the map did exist, but it had been confiscated in 1937 by NKVD, People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, officers. According to her, a secret expedition was working in the Black Yar area at that time, studying anomalous phenomena. "My father was a guide in that expedition," Valentina Ivanovna said quietly. "He never told me the details, but until the end of his life, he would wake up at night screaming. Before he died, he told me that they had found one of the caves and awakened something there. Of the 12 people in the expedition, only 3 returned. He said the rest remained there, but not dead. What happened to that expedition? Why did the Soviet authorities continue the Tsarist government's policy of concealing information?" Anton felt that he was getting closer to the truth, but each new fact only deepened the mystery. That same day, he met with a local hunter, Yegor Timofeyevich, an old, silent man who, according to Agafya, knew the taiga better than anyone else in the village. At first, Yegor refused to speak, but when Anton mentioned the NKVD expedition, something changed in his gaze. "My grandfather was among those 3 who returned," Yegor said unexpectedly. He never told what they found, but he had one thing left that he was told to keep and never show to anyone. After much hesitation, Yegor agreed to show Anton this thing. They went to his house on the outskirts of the village, and the hunter took a small metal container from an old chest. Inside lay a strange object resembling an amulet, a circle made of an unknown black metal with engraved symbols similar to those Anton had seen in the ethnographic book. "Grandfather said they found a whole crypt full of such items," Yegor explained. According to him, these were not just amulets, but keys to places where the boundaries between worlds are thin. When Anton took the amulet in his hands, he felt a strange, cold tingling. The symbols seemed to move under his gaze, although he understood that it was just a trick of the light. But something about this object evoked an inexplicable fear, as if it were connected to something ancient and dangerous. Jaeger said that his grandfather and the other survivors of the expedition were taken to Irkutsk, where they were interrogated for several weeks. After that, they were strictly forbidden to talk about what they had seen. To ensure their silence, they were threatened with reprisals against their families. His grandfather managed to save the amulet, hiding it before his arrest. But you know what's the strangest thing? Jaeger added, lowering his voice. After the expedition returned, the disappearances in the taiga did not stop. On the contrary, they became more frequent. In the 1930s, they blamed it on escaped prisoners from the camps during the war, on theft, on deserters, then on accidents, but we locals knew the truth. They became more hungry after they were disturbed. When Anton asked, "Who are they?" Jaeger refused to answer directly. He only said that in the taiga, there are places where even the most experienced hunters do not go, places where birds do not sing and plants do not grow, places where the air is always cold, even on the hottest summer day. "If you really want to know the truth," Jaeger said, "you need to talk to Maria. She is the only one in the village who saw them and remained alive." Maria turned out to be a very old woman living in the most remote house in the village. Jaeger warned that she was not quite in her right mind after what had happened to her. But sometimes fragments of truth slipped through in her incoherent speech. When Anton entered her house, he was met by the smell of herbs and old age. Maria sat by the window, staring into emptiness with unseeing eyes. She was over 90, but something in her face spoke of a lived horror that time could not erase. At first, she did not react to Anton's questions. But when he showed her the amulet, her eyes suddenly cleared. She began to speak quickly, jumping from one thought to another, mixing Russian words with Evenki. From her story, Anton understood that in her youth in 1953, she had worked as a geologist on an expedition searching for minerals in the taiga. "We found a cave," Maria said. Her voice suddenly became clear and distinct. Inside were drawings on the walls, figures unlike humans, and a passage leading deep underground. Our leader decided to explore it. There were 7 of us who went down. Only I came back. According to Maria, in the underground tunnels, they discovered an ancient temple carved into the rock. In the center of the temple stood a stone altar surrounded by strange statues. The statues depicted tall beings with disproportionately long limbs and faces featureless, with only indentations instead of eyes. "When we entered the temple, the air became freezing," Maria continued. "The lanterns began to go out one by one. In the darkness, we heard whispers, as if someone were speaking in an unknown language. And then I saw them." Maria described being similar to humans, but moving with unnatural smoothness. Their skin was pale, almost transparent, with visible blue veins. Their eyes were large, without pupils, completely black. They did not speak, but somehow Maria understood what they wanted. "They are hungry," the old woman whispered. "Not for bodies, for souls. They feed on fear, despair, hopelessness. They take not life, but essence, that which makes us human." According to her, the beings attacked the expedition. In a panic, everyone rushed to flee, but in the dark tunnels, it was easy to get lost. Maria heard the cries of her comrades, but could not help them. By some miracle, she found a way out and made it to the surface. When she reached the camp and told what had happened, no one believed her. They decided that the other members of the group had been caught in an underground collapse. 3 days later, men in uniforms came, Maria said. They interrogated me for a long time, and then said that if I told anyone what I had seen, they would send me to a mental hospital. They took all our notes and maps. The official expedition was terminated due to an accident. Maria fell silent. Her gaze became absent again. After a while, she whispered, "But they didn't stay there. They came to the surface. I saw them in the village, among the people. They may look like us, but inside, they are empty." Anton did not know what to think. Maria's story seemed incredible, but strangely coincided with what he had learned from other sources. Could the legends about the masters of the taiga have a real basis? So what were these beings? An unknown species of humans living in isolation, representatives of an ancient civilization, or something completely different, for which there is no explanation in modern science. In the evening of the same day, an event occurred that made Anton believe in the most incredible versions. When he was returning from Maria's house, already at dusk, it seemed to him that someone was watching him. Turning around, he saw a figure standing between the trees on the edge of the taiga. The figure was human, but something about its proportions seemed wrong. It did not move and seemed to be looking directly at Anton. When he blinked, the figure disappeared. Returning to Agafia's house, Anton told her about his findings and the strange figure he had seen. The old woman turned pale and quickly closed all the windows. "They know you are here," she said, "and they know what you are looking for." That night, Anton woke up to a strange sound, as if someone were scratching at the window of his room. Looking out, he saw nothing, but noticed tracks on the ground under the window, tracks unlike either human or animal. The next morning, Anton decided to contact the local authorities. The head of the administration, Viktor Petrovich, listened to him with obvious concern. When Anton finished his story, Viktor Petrovich was silent for a long time, and then said, "I don't know how much truth there is in these stories, but one thing I can say for sure. More people disappear in our area than anywhere else in the region. Officially, we attribute this to accidents in the taiga, but in most cases, the bodies are not found." According to the head of the administration, cases of disappearance have become more frequent in recent years. People coming from other places disappeared especially often. Tourists, geologists, hunters. Locals know where not to go, he explained, but visitors don't believe our warnings. Viktor Petrovich showed Anton a map of the area with the places of disappearance marked. Most of the points were concentrated around a certain area of the taiga, about 20 kilometers north of the village. There, according to the head of the administration, were ancient caves that the locals avoided. In 2015, a group of speleologists exploring these caves disappeared, Viktor Petrovich said. Officially, their death was attributed to a collapse, but when rescuers examined the caves, no signs of a collapse were found. Instead, they discovered strange drawings on the walls and traces of some kind of ritual. After that, the Ministry of Emergency Situations, MCS, prohibited visiting these caves, declaring them dangerous to life. Anton asked why information about the disappearances was not made public. Viktor Petrovich smiled wryly. "Do you think anyone would believe it? They'd say it's local folklore, scary stories for tourists. Besides, there's some pressure from above. No one wants to spoil the investment attractiveness of the region with strange stories. But what exactly happened to the missing people? What awaited them in the depths of the taiga?" Anton felt that he was getting closer to the truth, but each new fact only deepened the mystery. He decided that the only way to know the truth was to go to those caves himself. Despite all the warnings, Yegor Timofeyevich agreed to be his guide, although he tried to dissuade Anton from this venture. "If you've decided to go, then so be it.